The door goes at 4:19. A Halligan tool bites the frame near the deadbolt, splinters fly, and the entry team floods the narrow hallway of the rental house on Cherry Brook Lane. Weapon lights sweep across a cluttered living room, a flat screen still glowing on ESPN Deports, a half-eaten plate of carnitas on the coffee table, an ashtray full of Marlboro Reds. The suspect, 31-year-old Edwin Alexis Portillo Reyes, is already sitting up in the back bedroom when Special Agent Marco de la Cruz clears the doorway and orders him to the floor in Spanish. Portillo does not fight. He knows exactly what this is. His hands go behind his back at 4:21. 2 minutes start to finish. That's the number ICE Houston will later put in the after-action report. 2 minutes to end a case that took a year and a half to build. Portillo Reyes is a confirmed MS-13 member, specifically the Sailors Locos Salvatruchos West Side clique, a subgroup that migrated out of Los Angeles in the mid-2000s and took root along the Gulf Coast. He entered the United States in 2019 through the McAllen sector, was released pending an asylum hearing he never attended, and has been living in the Houston metro under 3 different aliases ever since. On paper, he is a landscaper. In practice, according to a sealed federal affidavit unsealed weeks later, he is something considerably more useful to the people paying him. He is a bridge. That is the word Homeland Security Investigations Assistant Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Nunn uses in an internal briefing later that morning. A bridge between MS-13's Houston area cliques and a mid-level plaza boss operating out of Reynosa, Tamaulipas, under the Sinaloa Cartel's Gulf-facing logistics arm. And bridges, Nunn tells her team, are what you take out first when you want the traffic to stop. The case did not begin with Portillo. It began, as most of these cases do, with something small and unrelated. In November 2024, DEA agents in Laredo intercepted a Ford F-250 crossing north on I-35, carrying 42 kilograms of methamphetamine hidden in the false floor of the bed. The driver, a 24-year-old from Nuevo Laredo, flipped inside 6 hours. He gave up a phone number. The phone number gave up a WhatsApp thread. The WhatsApp thread gave up a nickname, El Barco, the boat, and a Houston area code. El Barco was Portillo. From that thread, DEA intelligence began mapping a coordination pattern that surprised even veteran agents on the Gulf Coast Task Force. MS-13. Historically, an extortion and street violence organization, was not supposed to be moving cartel weight. The gang's business model runs on protection payments from small businesses, retail-level drug sales, and murder-for-hire contracts. Bulk narcotics transport is cartel territory. The two worlds intersect, but they do not usually blur. Here, they were blurring. Portillo was allegedly using MS-13 clique members as short-haul drivers, stash house operators, and enforcers on debts the cartel wanted collected quietly. In exchange, the cartel was paying MS-13 in product, a percentage of every load that moved cleanly through Houston. That product was then sold retail through the gang's existing street network, effectively laundering cartel supply into MS-13 revenue without either organization exposing its full structure. It was an elegant arrangement. It was also, under federal statute, a RICO predicate stacked on top of a narcotics conspiracy, stacked on top of an immigration violation. 3 federal handles on the same man. The problem was building it clean. Because Portillo had entered on a credible fear claim and had an open, if abandoned, asylum proceeding, ICE could not simply pick him up on an administrative warrant and put him on a plane. Any removal action would be scrutinized by the immigration court in Houston, where Judge Priscilla Ramos had, in 3 separate rulings that spring, thrown out ICE detainers for procedural defects. HSI needed the criminal case airtight, or the deportation would stall in litigation for years. That meant coordination. Real coordination. Not the interagency memo kind. By February 2026, the Houston field office had stood up a joint task force running out of a converted warehouse on Federal Road, HSI as the lead, DEA providing signals intelligence, ATF tracing 3 firearms recovered from a stash house in Aldine, and the U.S. Marshals on standby for the eventual takedown. The Mexican government, through a liaison at the SEIDO Organized Crime Prosecutor's Office in Mexico City, agreed to share intercepts from a parallel investigation into the Reynosa Plaza boss. That cooperation was itself unusual. Cross-border intelligence sharing had been strained since the diplomatic freeze of late 2024, and getting SEIDO to hand over raw wire product required 3 trips to Mexico City by HSI attaché Daniel Ruiz Ortega and a personal phone call from the U.S. ambassador. Think about what that means. A single street-level gang member in a rental house in Pasadena, Texas, was pulling resources from 4 U.S. federal agencies and 1 foreign ministry. That is what a bridge is worth. The first complication came in March. A confidential source inside the Sailors Locos clique, a 19-year-old identified in the affidavit only as CS1, went dark. His last recorded contact with his handler was a text message sent at 11:47 p.m. on March 14, 2026. Creo que saben. I think they know. His body was found 6 days later in a drainage ditch off Beltway 8, shot twice in the head, hands bound with electrical tape. The task force paused. Everything paused. Assistant Special Agent Nunn faced a decision that field commanders describe as the worst version of the job. Push forward and risk burning another source, or pull back and risk losing Portillo entirely if he ran. She pushed forward. She also, quietly, reassigned 2 other cooperating witnesses out of the Houston area within 72 hours, moving one to a WITSEC-adjacent placement in Kansas City and another to a temporary safe house in Baton Rouge. Neither man has been heard from publicly since. The investigation kept building. In April, DEA wires captured Portillo discussing a shipment of what he called material, cartel shorthand, prosecutors would later argue, for a firearms transfer from a Houston-area straw purchaser to a group of enforcers heading back south. 3 AR pattern rifles and a Barrett .50 caliber, according to ATF trace data. The Barrett alone raised eyebrows all the way to the ATF's national office. That is not a street weapon. That is a weapon for shooting through vehicles. 2 of the rifles were recovered in a traffic stop near Falfurrias in early May. The Barrett was not. That missing rifle became, for about 6 weeks, the central obstacle in the entire case. Prosecutors at the Southern District of Texas wanted the weapon located before any takedown, on the theory that a raid on Portillo would blow the network and the Barrett would vanish permanently into cartel hands. So I argued the opposite, that every day Portillo stayed operational was a day the network moved more product, more guns, and possibly more bodies. The argument went up the chain. It reached the U.S. Attorney's Office on May 22nd. On May 28th, the decision came back down. Move on Portillo. Accept the risk on the rifle. Prioritize the removal. The obvious question is why removal instead of prosecution? Portillo could, on paper, have been indicted federally for narcotics conspiracy, RICO, and firearms trafficking. A conviction would have put him in a federal penitentiary for 2 decades. Deportation puts him back in El Salvador, where MS-13 originated and where he still has infrastructure. Why not prosecute? The answer is grim and practical. A federal trial would have required exposing sources, methods, and the SIDO cooperation channel in open court. It would have taken 3 years minimum. It would have given Portillo's defense the opportunity to litigate every immigration procedural question that Judge Ramos had already shown a willingness to entertain. And El Salvador, under a security cooperation agreement signed in 2025, had agreed to accept high-value MS-13 removals directly into the mega-prison known as CECOT, the Terrorism Confinement Center outside Tecoluca. A CECOT placement for a confirmed MS-13 member is functionally indistinguishable from a federal life sentence, except it costs the U.S. government almost nothing and closes in weeks instead of years. It was the cheaper answer. It was also, in the honest judgment of the agents working the case, the right one, because a trial would have exposed CS1's replacement network and gotten more people killed. Sometimes the system's cleanest exit is the one that looks like a shortcut. Operational planning for the arrest ran through the final week of June. 12 agents from HSI's Houston Special Response Team, 4 DEA, 2 U.S. Marshals for Transport, 1 ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Officer, Deportation Officer Angela Kim, whose job began the moment the cuffs went on. She would carry Portillo's removal paperwork from arrest to airlift without ever letting the file leave her custody. Surveillance confirmed Portillo's pattern. He came home between 11 p.m. and midnight, watched television until roughly 1 a.m., and slept alone in the back bedroom. His girlfriend, a U.S. citizen with no known involvement in the network, had left him in April. The house was clean of children. That mattered. Under Houston Field Office protocol, a hard entry on a residence with minors present required additional authorizations and a child welfare officer on scene. Portillo's isolation made the tactical decision easier. In the 48 hours before the raid, HSI ran what agents call a soft perimeter, 2 unmarked sedans rotating through the neighborhood on staggered schedules, a utility van parked 3 houses down with a 2-agent observation team inside, and a drone overhead for the final 6 hours. The drone footage, later reviewed in the after action, showed Portillo taking out his trash at 11:14 that night. He stood in the driveway for almost a full minute, phone in hand, looking up and down the street. Then he went back inside and locked the door. Whatever instinct made him pause, it did not translate into action. He went to bed. The night of July 1st, agents staged at a Pasadena PD substation 2 miles from the target. They rolled at 4:05 in the morning in a convoy of 3 unmarked Chevy Tahoes and a Bearcat armored vehicle held in reserve 1 block out. Radio traffic was minimal. The neighborhood was asleep. At 4:19, the door came down. At 4:21, Portillo was in cuffs. At 4:34, he was in the back of a Tahoe headed for the HSI Processing Center on Smith Street in downtown Houston. He said nothing during the ride. He asked for no lawyer. He watched the freeway lights pass overhead and, according to Agent Dela Cruz's later report, closed his eyes as if going back to sleep. The search of the Cherrybrook house lasted until nearly noon. Agents recovered 2 cell phones, a laptop, roughly $11,000 in cash rubber-banded inside a hollowed-out speaker, a Glock 19 with an obliterated serial number, and a handwritten ledger in a spiral notebook that appeared to track cash movements against a code of animal names, perro, gato, toro, caballo, that analysts would later match to specific stash house locations across Harris and Fort Bend counties. Taped to the underside of a dresser drawer, agents also found 3 prepaid debit cards issued under names that did not match any of Portillo's known aliases, and a folded prayer card to San Judas Tadeo with a phone number written in pencil on the back. That number, cross-referenced against DEA logs the following week, belonged to a burner last active in Matamoros. The Barrett was not there. It has still not been recovered. Processing moved fast because it had to. ICE enforcement and removal operations had already coordinated the removal flight through the agency's Air Operations Unit in Alexandria, Louisiana, a chartered Boeing 737 configured for detainee transport, with a scheduled departure window on July 3rd out of Kelly Field in San Antonio. Portillo would be transferred by ground on July 2nd to the Karnes County Immigration Processing Center, held overnight, and put on the aircraft the following morning, alongside 41 other removals bound for San Salvador. That is the pipeline. That is how a case that took 19 months to build closes in 72 hours, once the arrest is made. There was one last complication. Portillo's court-appointed immigration attorney, a Houston solo practitioner named Vanessa Ruelas, filed an emergency stay of removal at 8:14 p.m. on July 2nd, arguing that her client faced a substantial risk of torture in Salvadoran custody under the Convention Against Torture. It was a legitimate filing. CECOT conditions have drawn international human rights complaints since the facility opened. Ruelas had grounds to make the argument. The stay was denied at 11:47 p.m. by a duty immigration judge in Arlington, Virginia. The ruling cited Portillo's confirmed MS-13 membership, the RICO predicate evidence developed by HSI, and the bilateral agreement under which El Salvador had specifically committed to accept and process high-value gang removals. Ruelas received the denial by email at 11:52 p.m. She had 5 hours to file an appeal. She did not make it. At 5:03 a.m. on July 3rd, Portillo was loaded onto the 737 at Kelly Field in leg shackles and a blue detainee jumpsuit. The aircraft pushed back at 5:47, wheels up at 6:04. It landed at Oscar Arnulfo Romero International Airport outside San Salvador at 9:38 local time. Salvadoran security forces were waiting on the tarmac. Portillo was transferred directly to a bus convoy, 4 buses, roughly 160 armed personnel, that departed for Seco within 40 minutes of arrival. He was processed into the facility that afternoon. Head shaved, uniform issued, cell assigned. Under the terms of El Salvador's state of exception, he has no scheduled release date and no scheduled trial date. He is simply there. Back in Houston, the Ledger recovered from Cherry Brook Lane opened 3 new investigations within a week. 2 stash houses were raided on July 8th. A third, in Rosenberg, was found already emptied. Someone in the network had moved fast. 6 additional MS-13 members were arrested across those operations. 4 were confirmed for removal. 2 are awaiting federal indictment. The Reynosa Plaza boss went dark on July 4th. His phone dropped off Sado's monitored network within 18 hours of Portillo's arrest, which either means he was warned or he was cautious. Either way, the bridge was down. Traffic patterns through the Gulf corridor shifted measurably in the weeks that followed, according to DEA analytics, not stopped but rerouted, which is what disruption actually looks like in practice. The Barrett remains missing. That's not a typo. A .50 caliber anti-materiel rifle capable of disabling a light armored vehicle at over a mile is, as of the last public update from ATF, still unaccounted for somewhere along the Gulf Coast corridor between Houston and the border. The agency's Field Intelligence Group has flagged it as a Priority 1 recovery. It has been flagged that way for 14 months. Assistant Special Agent Rebecca Nunn asked in an internal debrief what the Portillo case had taught her team, gave an answer later paraphrased in an HSI training document. The gang and the cartel, she said, are not competitors anymore in the way they were a decade ago. They are subcontractors. The cartel provides supply. The gang provides labor and territory. The border is not a wall between 2 worlds. It is a hinge. Deportation Officer Angela Kim, who signed the final custody transfer at Kelly Field, drove back to Houston that afternoon. She stopped once at a gas station outside Seguin for coffee and a package of peanuts, and sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before pulling back onto I-10. She had another removal scheduled for the following Monday, and another the Monday after that. The Houston field office averages 112 removals per week. Portillo was one file in a stack that never gets shorter. Which brings the story back to a gravel driveway in Pasadena. 4:18 in the morning. 12 agents against the siding of a single-story rental house.
The lead agent lifts 3 fingers. 2. 1. The door comes off its hinges. Inside, a man with a barcode tattoo on his neck sits up in bed and understands, in the half-second before the flashlights find him, that the case he did not know was being built has just closed on him. 2 minutes. 19 months. 1 flight south. The bridge is down. The traffic has rerouted. And somewhere between Houston and the Rio Grande, a rifle heavy enough to punch through an engine block is still out there, waiting for someone to pick it up.